Thanks for joining us on the third in our series of the future of food and work. And thanks also for the feedback that we've received so far. It's been incredibly welcome. This is on innovation, and we will be exploring how the current environment has impacted innovation and the approach to it. With over 60% of the Eurest business having been open throughout this crisis, we have had to work with our clients to continuously and rapidly adapt throughout the process. And we have seen this not only at a small scale, at an individual site level, but also in the way that we approach the business as a whole. The appetite for partnership and the speed of innovation has been prevalent throughout the country. We've got a comprehensive panel of experts lined up for you, so grab a cup of tea and pull up a chair. Now I'd like to introduce you to Liz Forte, our Director of Health and Wellbeing. And Liz has been working with our panel of experts and looking at the trends with consumers to see how organisations might change as we look to the future.
Hello, I'm Liz Forte. I'm Health and Wellness Director for Compass Group UK and Ireland. Now, lots has changed over the past few months, and there's been much talk about what the new normal is, with commentators talking about the death of the office, and some even predicting the end of cities as we know it, as they see a mass exodus to the countryside. So what is going to actually happen over the next few years and months, and what can we do to build the future that we want to see? First, let's look back. The speed of the change that followed lockdown was remarkable. Consumer behaviour seemed to change almost overnight, and businesses had to adapt rapidly just to keep up. This unpredictability is one of the reasons that agility, flexibility and speed have been so crucial. But while they were quick to come about, I believe that some of these changes are set to remain long into the future because they've actually revealed some hidden strengths. Initiatives that might have taken 18 months to set up in the past have been turned around in just a few days, thanks to rapid decision-making and expedited processes. This period has proved that organisational change can happen quickly when it needs to. And some of the changes that we've seen, these rapid adaptations at scale, have been necessary for businesses just to survive. And it's not just the startups that have had to be agile, it's everyone, from village shop to multinational. All of them have had to innovate to meet changing demands. So it seems that necessity really is the mother of invention. Which is why some of the greatest innovations don't involve shiny new gadgets or complicated technology, but different ways of working. One of the smartest innovations I've seen in recent years is a decidedly low-tech creation used by coffee farmers in Vietnam, where water is an increasingly sacred commodity. The farmers were struggling to access the same quantities of water that they used to, so they worked out a cheap and easy way to preserve it. They place a plastic bottle, one that would normally be thrown away as rubbish, upside down in the soil, and watch the condensation levels inside. When the water droplets become scarce, it means the water content of the soil is low. It's time to irrigate. This one small innovation, enabling farmers to monitor the water content of their soil and only water when needed, means that they use half the water consumption that they did before. The rest of the process remains unchanged, and this issue of things remaining unchanged is a key one. While many commentators are predicting the death of the office, it's also important to remember that many workplaces have remained open throughout the pandemic. That includes over 60% of the Eurest estate, serving businesses that have been providing vital services such as food production, communications and distribution. For people that have been working from home or furloughed during the pandemic, they will see more significant changes when they return to work, such as a change in office layout or reduced capacity in the employee restaurants. But for key workers that have been going all the way through, they've been adapting and changing on a daily basis to the different circumstances and the new guidelines that have come in. So often when we talk about the future of work, the focus is on flexibility, autonomy, and more working from home. But actually, there are a lot of workplaces where people need to physically be present to do their job. This might sound a bit controversial, but now more than ever, as we head into the future, I think we need to be conscious that some things just won't change. Generally, pandemics last 12 to 15 months, and that when this is all over, lots of life will go back to how it was before. Of course, it's important to think about what's changing, but we can also think about what will stay the same, and that's human nature. We're still the same creatures who crave status, want to be safe and secure, want to be happy, seek autonomy, and have friends. These things will always be important to us and crucial to our well-being. I really like how Jeff Bezos talks about it. He believes what's going to change in the next 10 years isn't as important as what's not going to change, because you can build a business strategy around the things that are stable in time. People and businesses stick to business as usual when they can. It's what their lives and organisations have built on, and it's what got them to where they are today. But in this post-lockdown era, innovation is interesting. We're moving so quickly, and there's lots of unanswered questions. It's almost an opportunity or an invitation to innovate. It's time to mix things up and to trial new thinking. I think many of us will have found that processes have been forcibly streamlined. Many clients have said to me that they've had a 5-year plan that they've been able to implement in just a few weeks, and that's because there have been fewer stakeholders and less of a drawn-out decision-making process. So is this a model to get things done? Less thinkers, more doers? So the big question is, what do we want to get done now that we know how to do it? We've established that the new hygiene factor is hygiene itself, but what else are we looking for? Experience is moving up the agenda. We're seeing the emergence of the experience economy, and that means that the best way to connect with people isn't through products or goods or services. Those can easily be copied or replicated and soon become commoditized. Instead, we need to connect with people, creating memorable and personal experiences. And this customer experience is the lifeblood of our business. As food service providers, we know that great food can often be table stakes, no pun intended, but it's the experience that really matters. To distinguish the workplace, firms used to compete through goods and services. Now they compete through personalised experiences. What's really interesting to me is this: you can't deliver personalised experiences alone. In some way, they have to be co-created, or at least the best ones are. You just set the stage, and then the participants make the experience. A related trend is personalisation. This is something that we're seeing in many industries now, enabled by increased use of digital technology, which enhances the user experience and allows for a greater degree of personalisation than ever before. In my world, which is workplace catering, I no longer see us as tied to a specific on-site restaurant. We're more of a provider of fantastic food and great services. And it might be that there's a fantastic well-being space and you order your food through an app. Ultimately, the food might not even be cooked on site. It's been fascinating to see the events and immersive theatre industries go through this period. How do you do events in an era of social distancing? There's been some fails, but also some big wins too. Hop-In, for instance, is an online events platform that offers superior conference facilities, including speed networking functionality and expo booths for sponsors. Walmart, meanwhile, is putting its car parks to new use, partnering with the Tribeca Film Festival to create 160 contact-free drive-in movie theatres. Moviegoers can, of course, order snacks and drinks from the retailer to enjoy with their film. It's a great imaginative repurposing in response to the immediate circumstances we find ourselves in. I think we'll also see a change in the way that companies relate to consumers. Big organisations will learn from startup culture, and problem solving will be centre stage as we address challenges that may previously have been ignored. And this will generate genuine advocacy and goodwill. Instead of traditional market research and focus groups, marketing teams like mine will look to build connections with real consumers to find ways to excite them. And I think we'll be paying a lot more attention to other sectors so we can get fresh insights and really understand what's changing and what's driving that change outside our own businesses. So this brings me on to cultural change. Cultural change is something that we often see over years rather than months. So a new idea or technology will come in and it will get picked up by the early adopters before moving on to the majority. It's only when it reaches critical mass that it becomes mainstream and is self-sustaining. And this can often be influenced by reputation, public advocacy, or in some cases, social stigma. Think about no and low alcohol beer. It's a really interesting development. Do you want my personal take? It tastes good, but I can't help feeling that the increase in popularity of low and no alcohol beer is in part due to the fact that we're also on social media. Who we are online is really important. Being drunk isn't a good look and actually becomes much less appealing if your drunken antics are on show for the whole world to see. Sometimes events just act as catalysts for what's already happening. The 2011 Fukushima tsunami disaster in Japan is a useful example of this. One outcome was a rejection of material goods, as people who had experienced or witnessed whole homes being washed away were less eager to acquire things. My personal favourite, Marie Kondo, the queen of decluttering, was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in 2015. Likewise, the COVID crisis has accelerated some changes that were already taking place, things like online shopping and working from home. And with all changes, there are winners and losers, such as Amazon, Zoom, and Ocado. However, I do think that the owners of Zoom would do well to sell some stock soon. People will go back to the office, and the future will look very different from 2021 onwards, more like the old normal pre-COVID. So the old normal will be back in some form. Ditto for property, especially in cities. Sure, there'll be some flight, and COVID will have an impact, but in the long term, people love being near other people. It's in our nature, and that's not changing. Offices and cities are prime examples of the fact that we're a deeply social species. So as we move into the next phase of this crisis, perhaps our focus should be not only on what happens next, but how. Innovation is often managed by a separate team or function, but some of the best ideas come from the front line. Take the BA Business Class Lounge team at JFK. It was their idea to feed passengers on the red eye before they got on the plane in order to maximise potential sleeping time. What can we do to ensure we're still getting to ideas like that? We need to push decision-making closer to the front line so that we can test, refine and act quickly, as we've proved we can, rather than preparing endless decks for senior leadership. We need to embrace different ways of thinking, and this diversity of approach is key. Do we need to review the skills and competencies of our people and maybe think differently about what we consider to be the essential qualities? It's important to look at our teams through a different lens, as working from home accentuates different attributes: collaboration, problem solving, agility, speed, and being adaptable and productive. These skills have never been so important. Some organisations ask their people to send their innovative ideas to a certain email address. This is the absolute antithesis to what I've been talking about. We need to see innovation as a mindset, a way of thinking and working. One of the few silver linings of the COVID crisis is that we've proven that we can adapt, both individually and collectively. We've risen to the challenge. So I'm confident about the future, and I'm excited to see what comes next.
I'd now like to introduce you to Liz Swanton. She's the COO of Feeder, and Liz will explore how technology will influence the future of food at work through the lens of transparency, personalization, and safety in the post-COVID world.
Hi, I'm Liz Swanton, and I am the co-founder and COO of Feeder. Feeder is an online platform that connects people in offices to better food. We help companies manage their food benefits programs more comprehensively, and we really give users and individuals control over what they're eating and how they're choosing to eat it. So I think, when I think about technology and how that's going to change the future of food, I really think about the fact that food is one of the last places that was really changed, I think, by technology, because food is a fundamentally physical thing. It has to be, right? And I think one of the joys of food is the way that it brings people together. And there's something inherently communal, and it has an element of a shared experience around that. I think that what we find, in current times when people aren't in the office, one of the things that we hear that people miss the most is the ability to socialize with their colleagues. And a lot of that comes around food, and, eating lunch together is certainly something our team does and something that we miss as building a sense of community. Now, all of that being said, that doesn't mean that sort of technology doesn't have a huge role to play in changing how we experience food and in enhancing the experience and interaction that we can have with food. So when I think about sort of the themes and the ways that technology is transforming and creating the future of food at work, I really think about transparency, I think about personalization, I think about safety in the post-COVID world, I think about health, and then convenience, of course. I think when we look at some of the first ways in which technology changed the food system in recent times, especially, we're really thinking about food delivery. And that's sort of, you know, food tech 1.0, we used to say. So I think that it's not so much just about convenience anymore, but there's all these other bits that are really, really important too. So one of the first things I think about when I think about the way that technology is transforming food at work and food really in general is about transparency. So when I talk about that, it's everything from, what's in your food and where did that food come from, to, any allergen labeling, to nutritional information. And for us, I think that what we really see in the market is that there's increased demand from consumers to know that information. And what used to necessarily be possible in, packaged food with much more comprehensive labeling requirements is now coming into fresh food. And technology is allowing us to gather all of that information and present it in a very easily digestible way to the end user and allow the user to really say, I want to make my choices. So maybe I only want to eat, fish that is MSC certified, right? Maybe I want to know where my meat has come from. Maybe I want to make choices about, local produce or seasonal produce. And technology allows us to present that to people in a way which makes it digestible and easily accessible. And when I say easily, what I mean is the average person is probably not going to take the time, no matter how much they would wish to actually go and research everything that they're eating. But they want to know. And that can really be a value add and a differentiator in whatever food, program you're providing. And so I think that's something that we really see as, the future of how food is going to be provided to people and how people want to interact with it. The next thing that I think about when I think about how technology is really, changing how we experience food is personalization. So personalization, I guess, is the difference between, picking different things that you want and customizing something where I would pick, the chicken and the salad and the kale and the, bacon or no bacon to customize my own meal, to the system knowing and learning about my food preferences and automatically giving me things which are more closely aligned with what I'd like. I think we only have to look at, our Spotify playlists or our Netflix queues to realize that the power that personalization has in giving us content that's the content we want to consume. If we think about food, it's the same. It's content. It's just content we're physically consuming. And technology can really bring both convenience and delight to that. So when I think about the convenience element, it's, if I'm vegan, it's not going to show, the system isn't going to show me things that have meat in it. If, I've chosen, everything with, everything with chicken in it, then, it's going to start to show me some more chicken things. So that's all about the convenience element of personalization, making it easier to pick the things that I want to see and choose the things that I want, especially in a world where, we're talking about food at the office and you're time constrained, you want something to be easy. So personalization gives you that. What it also gives you is a sense of delight. So what algorithms can do is not just give you the same thing that you've already chosen, but understand the patterns and behaviors that you're expressing to sort of understand how adventurous are you, how much variety do you like, and feed you new things that you may not otherwise have seen or may not otherwise have chosen, but still have the chance to get pushed up on top of your queue per se, and sort of experience something different. And so that's something that we look at in, certainly, we're just starting down the route of machine learning for personalization at Feeder, but there's a lot of other, food technology and other technology platforms that do it fantastically. And it's something we definitely look to as an extra level of delight that we can add to how you experience food. The next thing that I think about when I'm thinking about technology as an enabler in the future of food is actually safety in a post-COVID world. So our perception of what's safe has changed dramatically in the last few months, I think globally. And now food has always been a place where, health and safety standards are, always watched and kept very carefully. So in some ways, the industry, I think, is well ahead of others in thinking about how do you maintain safety and health, and avoid contamination and, in a product. But I think that people more and more want to think about social distancing, right? So you no longer want to stand in a crowded restaurant or queue for, to pick up your meal. You want to be comfortable that the food has not been, I guess, intermingled with others, except in the correct environment. So we talk about individually packaged meals. I think there's also something about how you order and where you order. So the less interaction you have with other people, unfortunately, right now, I think that potentially the better, especially in the short term when we're thinking about returning to work in a way that makes people feel safe and confident in their workplace and in their day at the office. And so certainly being able to order food on your own device, rather than necessarily having to interact with the screen that other people have or someone at a till, I think that we certainly see that as a trend that will be coming more and more, and as something which gives people confidence that the food that they're about to consume is safe, and that key part of their day of lunchtime, or for many people also breakfast and sometimes dinner at the office, but that key part of the day of being at the office is something which you can still approach with confidence and be happy that you're able to get something that you feel good about eating, whether that's from an in-house, from your in-house cafeteria or restaurant, from a coffee shop, from, delivered, however that is. I think that we need to think about building technology that helps people feel secure. And that's something that certainly we're turning our minds to, and I don't think we've seen the end of or necessarily have the answer to. But I think that that's something more and more that will really change the pattern of how people have been thinking about using technology as an enabler at the office. Another thing that technology can really do is help us interact more, in a better way or more in depth with the food that we eat with regard to our health. So when I think about that and I think about the opportunity we have, I think that, the days where an employer saw an employee simply as someone who was in the office for this little time box that they were there and wasn't thinking about the broader health and wellness, both physical and mental, of their employees, I think those days are gone. And, users these days, or individual employees, every person is thinking more and more about their health and realizing the importance of nutrition in that. Now, I think that that's only been heightened by COVID-19, but it certainly wasn't started by it. And I think some of the areas that we want to explore and we want to see the industry exploring is, now that if you're ordering your food online, you have the information about that. So you can feed it into your Fitbit tracker, your Apple Health, your Google Fit, and you can start to see the impacts of what you're eating and what your eating has sort of directly on how you feel. And I think that having the whole experience online really enables that in a way that, typing in your food, your food information into a software wouldn't necessarily, just because really, again, technology is creating a more seamless experience. And I think the other thing that we really think about is what tools can we give employers that enable them to positively empower the health of their employees. So I think that we're going to continue to see more and more of that. And for us, it's anything from, just making it easier to make healthy choices, putting more healthy choices on the menu than unhealthy ones, right? But I think that there's a long way that we can go and more that we can do about enabling companies to understand what people are eating and therefore what interventions and what programs maybe they'd like to put into place as well. Finally, I think that technology, as we think about it, is a huge enabler of convenience. And that, I think, doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. If we think about, food used to be that you either had to buy it from a grocery store, go to a restaurant, make it yourself, right? Now, we think about this whole omni-channel experience of you've got meal kits, you've got delivery partially prepped, you've got things coming hot to your desk, you've got every possible way of accessing and exploring food that you can have. And for us, when we think about convenience, it is that omni-channel experience. And I think that it's been done so much better and more at home, and we're starting to see it more and more in the office. So we want to make it feel seamless to arrive in the morning and have your coffee ready for you, then, have something ordered for lunch so you can go and eat, with your colleagues in the workplace canteen, or bring back to your desk, or eat outside, and get some fresh air. And then maybe in the evening, you can order an extra meal that you can take home, or you can have your meal kit come to you at your house, which allows you to cook your favorite meal from your favorite restaurant that you have at lunch every day. And I think thinking about how technology can enhance that journey and make all of that more convenient, is something that I think that we really are just the beginning of the experience of. Finally, the last piece that I want to talk about is convenience. And I think that's because it's almost the one to me that's the least interesting, because it's the most obvious. And it's the one where, a lot of food delivery apps have achieved that very, very well. I think that, we think about convenience in how we receive food now and how we can access food now. And, we're no longer at a place where you've either got a grocery store or you've got a restaurant. I think we're now at a place where food is omni-channel, and food at work should also be omni-channel. So we're thinking about, obviously, you can bring food from home, you can go around the corner shop to get something from a grocery store, you can grab and go from a restaurant, you could sit into an in-house restaurant, you can pre-order and take away from your in-house restaurant, you can pre-order, food for the evening that you want to take as you leave the office. You can get a meal kit delivered. And I think that for us, the convenience part, where I see really interesting trends happen, is about this omni-channel experience. And that's something that I think that, there's a lot of great products out there, and bringing more of those into the office and thinking about a diverse range of access to food in the office is something that, I think we're going to see more and more of as well. Everything that I've spoken about so far really is about the user experience. But I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that there was a huge shift happening in how food is produced, and that there's an opportunity for technology to more and more really enhance that. And it's something that, we certainly don't do as much at Feeder, but I see some other, companies with fantastic innovation thinking about supply chain, sourcing and traceability, just-in-time production, and the element of producing food in a dark kitchen instead of in a restaurant, so you can be more flexible, maybe utilize your staff better. And all of these things that we're doing, I think, are making the system more resilient. And especially as we think about the impact that COVID-19 has had on the hospitality industry and on the producers of food, the more technology can enable and enhance resilience, the more it's going to be able to help that industry get back on its feet. And I think that that's so important, because it really enables, every user and every individual to have a fantastic experience with food. And that's something that I think, we eat 3 times a day. Having a fantastic experience with food is something that I don't think you can take for granted. And that certainly underlies, our philosophy and how we think about all of these different ways that technology is transforming food. It's really about, how do we create a fantastic experience? How do we get the right food to the right people at the right time, and make sure that it's delicious and healthy for you?
Coming up, Tiny Giant's Richard Norton waxes lyrical about risk-taking, and Antonia Acuna gives his take on how innovation is just a state of mind. But first, my good friend Shilen Patel will share his thoughts on the role that startups can play in innovation.
Hello, my name's Shilen Patel, and I'm the founder of 3 companies. The first is Independence United, which is an innovation company that sits at the intersection between large corporations and startups to create really disruptive innovation. The second is a company called Distill Ventures, which I founded with my co-founder 7 years ago, which invests in startups, but does that really on behalf of a large company called Diageo. We find those startups for Diageo, and then if they're really successful, Diageo ends up buying them. And it's a way for them to do really disruptive innovation, but outside of their company. And then most recently, I've set up a company called Rebelisk, which has really been set up to deal with what should disruptive innovation look like in a post-COVID world. And all of that experience means I've had 25 years at the cutting edge in food and beverages of witnessing innovation at the front line, mostly in food and beverages. I've had the privilege of seeing innovation both be tremendously successful and unfortunately tremendously unsuccessful in both large companies and also with lots and lots and lots of startups. And so I've seen how innovation differs between large companies and small companies. And most recently, I've had a lot of experience across lots of different categories of seeing how people are dealing with the changes that the pandemic and COVID-19 have created. So I wanted to talk about three things today. The first is, how does innovation differ between large companies and small companies? The second is, in my experience, where does innovation go wrong and what drives some of those failures? And the third is, how is COVID having an impact on innovation across lots of different categories? So on the first of those topics, how does innovation differ between large companies and small companies? Large companies are really built for scale and efficiency. They're really good at what I call 1 million widgets to 1 billion widgets. They're really good at understanding their industry as it already exists, and they're really good at taking things to very, very large scale if they're proven, which means that they're generally really good at what I call close-in innovation. Line extensions of existing brands, new flavors of new products, close-in adjacencies. And that, as a result, both the processes and culture that they apply to innovation is built for scale and efficiency. So you might recognize this if you're from a large company. Your innovation systems and processes are normally stage gates. They normally involve lots and lots and lots of thinking, often, unfortunately, lots of paper writing and deck writing. But they also involve lots of time, more often than not, and also lots of spend. And I would characterize innovation inside large corporations as taking lots and lots of effort, but very, very robust. Often people are thinking very hard about what those solutions should look like, but not necessarily getting it away very practically, very quickly. Small companies, on the other hand, are often disrupting. They're often finding new opportunities in new spaces. So whereas in big companies, they're often taking a lot of resources to get innovation away, and it tends to be close in. Smaller companies are often not hampered by the rules of the game that the big companies have to use. They often don't have legacy systems or legacy thinking. They're often slightly naively coming at problems, which is often quite an interesting and potentially valuable thing. But the most important aspect, I think, is their processes and culture are very different from large companies. They're very good at doing more with less, and that often means they're going faster. They're often trying things in prototyping and iterative ways, and they're learning as they're doing rather than sitting back and thinking about what answers should look like. They're often just acting on the impulse of having come up with an answer. And those cultures and processes are very different. And it's not that one's good and one's bad. If large corporations want close-in innovation, then their innovation processes are normally very good for that. The problem is that the world's changing, and pre-COVID, it was already changing very fast and in a very big way. And as a result, that innovation needs to be further out. And large organization systems and processes and culture aren't really very good at dealing with what I call disruptive innovation, stuff that looks at a 3 to 5 year time horizon. And that's where startups, who I think are good at 0 to 1 million widgets, blank sheets of paper to getting to about 1 million of something, they're really good at spotting those opportunities because they can spot them faster, they can move faster, and they can adapt faster. Are the founders of small businesses superhuman? No, they're just normal human beings like the rest of us. Are they extreme risk takers? Well, I think that's often a fallacy that people believe. But often, if you're betting your own money and remortgaging your house in order to start a business, you're going to be anything other than a risk taker. So the potential for large companies to create disruptive innovation by adopting a bit more of the mindset of smaller companies and startups and founders, I think is large. So where does innovation go wrong? Where does failure, when you're trying to be disruptive, happen? Well, in both big and small companies, I think it happens in three places. The first of those is not addressing a genuine problem with a genuine solution. Often, whether it's in big companies or small companies, I find people innovating and not really genuinely understanding what's the problem I'm trying to solve. Is there really a headache here that people would like fixed? And even if they've overcome that and they are addressing a genuine problem, their solution is often not really different and really better than something that already exists. And that's crucial. So that's failure number one. Failure number two is even if people find these addressable problems and they find great solutions, in trying to be disruptive, they overcomplicate things. They try and make products that are overly complex and try and sell them in too many places, all at the same time, without really understanding whether any of this is working yet. So overcomplicating the go-to-market strategy, if you want to call it that, is often failure point two. And the third reason that innovation often fails, I think, is that people don't learn by doing. What do I mean by learn by doing? Often people will come up with a product in their heads, they may even write it down, they may even pitch it. They'll certainly write papers or decks inside big businesses, and they'll ask innovation companies to come up with prototypes or concepts, and they'll make their product. And sometimes they'll do focus groups. They haven't actually put that product in the real world yet. And so I'm constantly baffled by how many products get launched in food and beverages that then never change. They get launched on day one and people react to them, and no one goes back and iterates the products or changes them. And some of the most successful food and drink startups I've ever been involved with will go through multiple iterations in the first few months. And they'll often learn by doing. They will put the product into very, very small marketplaces, often digitally enabled, route to consumer, direct to consumer. And they will spend very small amounts of money behind those products to learn how consumers are reacting to them, whether they like the products. They'll often use different labels or different packaging to see which the consumers prefer. And so learning by doing, I think, is one of the best ways to create truly disruptive innovation. Because if it's truly disruptive, you probably don't know what the answer is yet. You have to put it in front of people in the real world and learn from that. But there's one place in my experience where disruptive innovation goes wrong only in large corporations. And this is one of my favourite games to play when I'm playing with some of my clients. You talk to the innovation teams about their innovation ideas, and they will pitch you or tell you about loads of brilliant ideas that they've come up with. But my favourite question to ask them is, great, that's an amazing idea. Would you put the next 6 months of your salary into that idea? And more often than not, the answer is no. In my experience, you can often kill something like 75% of all internal innovation projects by simply asking the project owner whether they would put some of their own hard-earned cash into that idea. And it's a really telling answer. If you don't believe in it, why would you expect anyone else in the world to believe in it? And so the cultural trait that I think large organisations have that creates real failure in innovation is that they don't act like owners. They don't act like entrepreneurs do, who have put their hard-earned cash often into their own ideas because they genuinely believe in them. So how has the pandemic affected innovation? Well, the first thing to say is that black swan events, truly unexpected events of the scale and stature that the pandemic has been, what they genuinely do, I believe, is accelerate change that was already in existence. So we were already seeing some changes in behaviours in consumers. Imagine the move to e-commerce, consumers looking for more healthy, sustainable options, for instance, within food and drink. All those changes, I believe, have just been accelerated. We've perhaps seen something like 2 to 3 years worth of consumer behavioural change happen in 12 weeks. And the net impact of that is you no longer have an excuse to not change some of the business model orthodoxies that you've always believed in. So if you were one of those companies sitting there believing that the e-commerce change was slow and it was going to happen eventually, but you had a good few years yet to go, well, I'm sorry, but all that just changed in the last 3 months. And it's happened in lots of different places, in lots of different categories, on top of just the change to e-commerce, as an example. So what should you do about it? Well, before you jump in and start trying to create lots of disruptive innovation as a result of the opportunities which I think the pandemic will have created, you need to be considering whether the change you think might have happened is actually permanent and scalable. So I often liken the changes that have occurred in the past few weeks to the fact that we've stretched a series of rubber bands. We've moved consumers into new behaviours, and they act a bit like rubber bands, I think, in the sense that the pandemic and the net effects of the pandemics have forced consumers into new behaviours. The crucial question is which of those rubber bands have snapped and those new behaviours are here to stay. An example would be in the service sector. I think the number of people who are going to go back to their big offices in central urban location 5 days a week for most of the weeks of the year, I think that's a rubber band that's snapped, and I think we're definitely going to see changes in working patterns and people spending more time working from home, which means that they'll work differently when I think they're in the office. But there'll be other rubber bands which do slowly or fast snap back into their original positions. So job number one, before you jump into a whole pile of initiatives, is to see if you can work out which rubber bands do you think have permanently snapped and therefore created opportunities, which changes in behaviour do you think are there, and which rubber bands you think might go back, in which case that's business as usual. So I often get asked for advice about how organisations should think about innovation in a post-COVID world. What are the things that they should look to change or look to do? And I think there are 3. The first is don't try and predict the future. It's really easy in times like this to look to futurists and people who are futurologists and writing about the future and ask them to write you a deck or a paper that predicts the future. And the reality is none of us can predict the future. A lot of the changes still haven't been fully formed and we don't quite know where they're going to go. And rather than predict the future, go back to the idea of learning by doing. So hypothesize about what the future might look like, come up with some great ideas, but before you spend too much time and money, try and put prototypes of them into practice and see if that teaches you whether the change is big or not. The second piece of advice I'd give is where you find those opportunities and where, when you learn by doing, you think they're really good opportunities, double down on those. I think fortune will favour the brave here. People who then not only prove those opportunities, but go at them fast, fully resourced, I think will be the people that win when they're taking advantage of these opportunities. The third is now is a really good time to change the culture and processes that drive your innovation. This is a really good time with all of this change going on in any case, people changing their working habits in any case, changing their perspectives on the world in any case. It's a really good time to have a look at those processes and culture that we talked about a bit earlier that big corporations tend to want to use for close-in innovation, and really see if you want to adapt and change some of those to be a bit more like startups and founders. The sorts of things that you might want to try. You might want to try pitching to develop concepts verbally in 5 or 10 minutes rather than paying tens of thousands of pounds to innovation companies to come up with concepts. You might want to try people rapidly prototyping solutions and putting them online and seeing if they can sell a few. These are just a few examples of the sorts of changes big companies can now look to make in their processes and culture. And in conclusion, the 3 pieces of advice I'd leave you with are, number 1, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. That's one of my favourite quotes. It's by a sci-fi author, a guy who happened to coin the internet before the internet was a thing. And what he meant by it was don't try and predict the future, as I said earlier, but look for where the future's already happening in small pockets, and then your job's to see if you can scale those. The second piece of advice I'd give is learn by doing. Whatever you do, try and turn your ideas into practical solutions as fast as you can, as cheaply as you can, and use necessity as the mother of invention. And get out there and try stuff, because I believe data is the new oil. Learning and understanding what the new normal is going to look like is where the value is. And the third is change your culture. Perhaps ask your teams to act more like owners.
Now, I'm slightly apprehensive about introducing you to Noughts from Tiny Giants. The title of his talk, Be More Jimmy, and I believe he has his guitar.
Hi, my name's Richard Norton, co-founder of Bristol creative technology startup Tiny Giant. We help pioneering brands create standout ideas, craft experiences, and step confidently into new media and technology. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that I'm holding an electric guitar. You are correct. That's because we're going to talk about Jimi Hendrix. We're going to think about the connection between his ability as a transformational force in rock and roll and your ability to be more innovative in terms of culture and technology and marketing and advertising. So I invite you to be more Jimmy. Jimi Hendrix was a pioneer and innovator of the electric guitar. The thing is, he wasn't the first person to use an electric guitar, but he was an individual who literally came out of nowhere and played it and used it in very different ways to everyone else. The legacy of his playing is it's gone on to basically influence every strand of rock and roll ever since. That, ladies and gentlemen, is innovation. So let me demonstrate for contextual purposes what I mean. Otherwise, it seems rather pointless me having an electric guitar. Here's a trick. A chord, in fact. There's nobody else, as far as I'm aware, in the 70 years of rock and roll who's had a chord named after them. But this is the Hendrix chord. So the thing about Hendrix using that chord is that he placed it into a lot of his material. You heard it in Purple Haze, Foxy Lady, Crosstown Traffic, number of songs. It became synonymous to sound, but it also became very influential. If I just make those notes again. It's kind of bluesy and it's jazzy and it's rocky. It's all these things. It's like it's almost like a mashup of many styles in one place. He also did a lot of interesting things with feedback, with distortion, the way he strung his guitar, technique with the thumb over the top. All these things kind of led to the blend of that defined the Hendrix sound and then went to be so influential all the way up to modern day music. That, ladies and gentlemen, is innovation. So what has this got to do with you? Well, my starting point is to quote the American science fiction writer Theodore Sturgeon, who famously cited that 90% of everything is crap. Now, of course, he wasn't talking about everything himself. He was referring to science fiction writing or people's perceptions of it. But quite recently, 2013, an American philosopher called Daniel Dennett took Theodore Sturgeon's idea and used it as a tool for critical thinking, and hence why Sturgeon's law was born and this idea of 90% of everything being crap came into existence. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. Guitar playing, cars, cheese boards, movies, marketing. 90% of everything is crap. So your task in whatever you do is to avoid being in the 90%. Everybody wants to be in the 10%, don't they? You want to be uncrap. And the way to do that is through innovating. How easy is innovation? Well, I would contest it's much easier than perhaps it seems. It's more to do with kind of mindset and attitude. This is what it's about when I talk about finding your inner Jimmy. Advertising guru Bill Bernbach, who in himself was the kind of Jimi Hendrix of advertising, one of the original madmen, has a very famous quote where he says, if your advertising doesn't get noticed, everything else is academic. And this is a really important principle, the idea of getting yourself noticed. And the way to do that is to stand out. And the way to stand out is to think about the things that you can affect and apply innovation to them. Innovation is a journey. You don't innovate and come to a full stop. It continually changes. You have to always be on top of these things. You also have to have the right mindset. You have to push against open doors to explore rather than closing them. Think about meetings you sit in where ideas are thrown around the table and people say, I think this, I think that. Well, that's okay to have an opinion, but sometimes opinions close down innovation. Innovation can be quite scary at times because it doesn't come from the center. It comes from over here. It's an outlying thing. So if you come across new ideas and new ways of thinking that you feel uncomfortable with, that's probably a good thing because it suggests a way of doing things that's different and interesting and worth exploring. Do you think Jimi Hendrix was gripped with fear when he set his guitar on fire at the Monterey Rock Festival? Probably not. But fear is an obstacle to get over. It often very much shuts down the kind of things you want to explore. And it's this notion of mindset. It's not a case of thinking, what if it goes wrong? It's much better to flip it and think, what if it goes right? That's a way, a fast path, as it were, to finding your inner Jimmy. So in the world I inhabit, there's all kinds of interesting emerging technologies that we look at all the time and see if they can be used. Ultimately, it's not about using technology for the sake of it. It's about using technology to sort people's problems and their challenges, whatever they are. That's where it becomes really, really useful and really, really effective. It's easy to think that emerging technologies are expensive or they're prohibitive, only the preserve of big brands, big businesses, big organizations with big fat meaty budgets. But to be honest, the truth is the opposite. It's actually very democratized technology that businesses of any size can use. So, I think of examples that we've done where we've worked in creative AI and we helped make the world's first AI gin. That was only a small distillery who were able to punch above the weight because of that. The same goes with augmented reality technology. It sounds very clever, but you can be the smallest pizzeria in the world and you could do a campaign that puts you on the map. The thing is not to be fearful of it. The thing is to embrace it. So I think there are 3 rules to being more Jimmy. 1 is to be more courageous. 2 is to start small and test what works. 3 is to check out technology and find out what works. Immerse yourself in it. So let's consider being courageous. It isn't about looking at what your competitors are doing and trying to replicate it or do it a little bit better. You can do that, but that's what everybody else does. If you want to stand out, if you want to be more Jimmy, you've got to zig to their zag. You've got to reach out and do something very different. That's where bold thinkers go. So sometimes you should look at technology, you should look at platforms in marketing, for example, with an open mind. You hear things in meetings, you talk to clients and you say, I think TikTok would work really well for you. And you see their faces. They go, TikTok, isn't that for kids dancing on videos? And you go, well, no, it isn't actually. You should, like Jimmy, open your mind. Take the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. It's been showing art for nearly 400 years. And yet recently they've taken a TikTok and you know what? They're smashing it. Number 2, start small and test. What I'm saying here is you shouldn't risk everything. You shouldn't put all your chips on one number or on one horse. What you should do is try things on a small scale and see if they work. You learn from everything. You learn from your successes. You learn from your failures. Just do the stuff on a small scale. It doesn't mean a lot of spend and it makes things happen. And then from there, you can expand. 3, check out the tech. Every day, technology changes. It's like an exponential curve of change. But you've got to get in it and you've got to get your hands dirty and you've got to see what works. I'm not saying dig super deep, but at least have a basic understanding of what's out there and how it can help you solve your challenge. There's a wonderful quote by American marketing professor Scott Galloway from his book, The Algebra of Happiness. It goes something like this: nothing wonderful will ever happen in your life if you don't take a risk. So I implore you to take a risk. It's time to excuse yourself, to touch the sky and be more Jimmy.
Next up, Antonio Acuna, the Director of Commercial Delivery at Parity. And Antonio will be looking at innovation in the context of a shifting mindset.
Today I'm going to be talking to you about 5 tips to do innovation and do it right. My name is Antonio Acuna. I am the Commercial Delivery Director for Parity. We at Parity are experts are digital transformation and data. We find the right talent to achieve the right solution for the problems that our industry faces today across all spectrums and segments. The first thing we need to think of when talking about innovation is what are the user needs. The first thing we need to do is to go and find out what are the needs that we need to satisfy. We get lost in the processes and structures we have in place, from running a business, running a restaurant, whatever, and disassociate ourselves from the need, the user. What are their needs? We don't know them, they know them, we need to identify them. That's the first thing. Once you know what your needs are, then you'd go to the second point, which is rethink your service based on those needs. Do not assume that the service you have is the one that is needed. It is a service that exists because of a whole series of things came together and made it what it is today. At this point, you go back and look at what is supposed to be the things that we are actually fulfilling, and look back through the entirety of your service and see if any actions there is not about fulfilling that need. Once you have looked at your service from the lens of the user needs you have discovered, you're going to have to take a very bold step and break things. Do not be afraid of breaking things. You cannot innovate with the old. You can only innovate by bringing in a new view, a new look. What the future needs may have nothing to do with what the past has been. Once you've been bold enough to break a couple of things, once you have looked at your services from the lenses of, or through the lenses of the user needs, you need to start doing small things. So break everything into small chunks and iterate. Do things very quickly to see if you can fulfill the need. What shape will fulfill that need? Ignore the rest will follow. As you begin to establish small clusters of different ways of doing something, a new service begins to emerge. You don't need to plan it from beginning to end. Once you have looked at the needs, looked at your service through the lens of the needs, broken a couple of things, started small pockets of activity looking towards the future, not the past, and looked at your service and how that service applies to the individual, then you get to the point where you can actually understand what is the role that the individual play. Do not assume you know what your service means to your user. You could be anything to your user. For example, in a restaurant situation, you may think you're a provider of food. But to me, you might be the place I go to hide or read at my break, the quiet place to have a difficult conversation, or the place I get some food. Do not assume you know it. Find it out. And you can only find it out through identifying user needs and understanding their behavior. Once you bring that together, once you start building small clusters of innovation that look towards the future and that brings your customers as human elements in your transactional reality, then the whole thing shifts. Then you're not just selling food, you're not just doing restaurants, you are actually in the business of enabling people to be healthier, to be happier.
I hope you enjoyed that fantastic lineup of guests, and thank you again to all of them for taking part, and also to all of you. If you want to watch any of those sessions again, they will be available on the Eurest website. And our next event